All right, so today we've got a really awesome panel called Sci-Fi and Fantasy, Where Do They Meet? I am a huge fantasy fan as well as sci-fi. I actually got started reading science fiction courtesy of Edgar Rice Burroughs. That, of course, led me naturally into fantasy, so it's just something that I love to share with people. I've got some awesome authors here with me to talk about it. Aaron, tell us a bit about yourself real fast.
I'm an author. I live in North San Diego County. I've had some short works published on Liberty Island and microhorror.com, and I'm currently working on an urban fantasy novel. And I think that really lends into the question of where sci-fi and fantasy mix, because you've got magic working in a world where we've got actual laws of physics and technology.
Love it. Agnes.
Okay, so my name is Agnes. I live in Pickering, Ontario. And I'm a self-published author. I just put out my first novel, Q16 and the Idol Worlds, which is a portal fantasy which blends elements of science fiction into it. So that's kind of my background. And then I've also got a short story published in another anthology, which is purely science fiction.
That's awesome. Michael, you here yet or still having some trouble? Nope. Give him a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. The truth is that science fiction and fantasy, a lot of it is incredibly similar. The only difference is that element of magic versus tech, right?
I think so, because you have in fantasy, you're inventing a new world, and unless it's really hard sci-fi set in the very, very near future, you're inventing your own world there. Even the hard sci-fi set in the future, they're extrapolating and creating a new world where we've discovered new things that let us do fantastic things. It's the fiction of today.
That's awesome. Now, Agnes, what do you prefer? Tech or magic for your stories? What is your go-to?
Oh dear. Well, as somebody who's a graduate of design, so I design websites and that sort of thing, tech is kind of what I turn to, and I always look at it very analytically. We actually had a class where we had to watch a bunch of old sci-fi films and kind of look at it. Is this feasible? Is this something that would actually exist? So for that element, I love that, but I grew up as a fantasy fan primarily. So I'm kind of on the fence because I love both for various reasons, right?
That's true. That's true. Aaron, what about you?
I'm probably more urban fantasy, but I do enjoy the sci-fi, the Expanse series. I think is great. And what I like is we're in an age now, I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who had the famous quote about
hello,
as sufficiently advanced tech would look like magic. And I think we're in an age now where even if we went back 100 years ago, are certainly not primitive ancestors, if they saw a cell phone, would think there has to be some kind of magic involved, because we've got more computer power than NASA, and we can be having this conversation with multiple people in video over a device about as big as a small book.
Very true, very true. That was actually a quote that I was going to talk about in a bit, so thanks for stealing that, Aaron.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a really interesting thought to think about, that what we know as magic or what we know as tech is what's so normal for us is so magical for someone from, as you said, even 100 years ago. So imagine what I like to think about when I'm writing fantasy. I'm a fantasy author, so that's where I hang out. But I love to think about the scientific explanation for, let's say, the magic or the thing that I'm trying to explain. And that almost makes it more real in my mind. Like I'm writing these short stories based on different disorders or dysfunctions. For example, one is autism and sensory processing disorder. And this guy's eyes, his brain processes light and color in a different way than normal people. So he sees these pictures, these black pictures, and he's the only one who can understand what they mean, because his eyes process his brain processes the light differently. But to everybody else, it's like it's a magical gift. And so it's all set in a very fantasy world, but using sort of what we understand of the human brain and the technology that we have. So it's kind of it's a fun way to try to explain magic in a technological way.
And I think that's helpful. I think it helps for any kind of fantasy world. Since it's different, it has to have grounded rules. And if you set up your rules of metaphysics, like we have laws of physics here, I think it helps keep the author on track, and I think it makes it more fun to read for the reader.
That's true. We've got Michael here joining us. Michael, tell us about yourself in 10 words or less, or more.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. We finally got it working. I had some technical difficulties coming on. Not much to say about me, really. Just a fantasy writer. I build really big worlds, and hopefully I'll have my first novel out by the end of the year, hopefully. So, not much to say about me, really.
All right. Well, that's good. So we're talking magic and fantasy. Obviously, you're a fantasy writer, as you say. So you prefer magic as your go-to solution for the problem, or that's your go-to option?
That's interesting, because Counterbalance, which is the main novel I'm writing, it has magic, but a lot of it is politics. So that's the main reason, that's the main way of dealing with problems which line up. Magic is the problem, but it's not the solution. No way. They have to try and survive with conventional means, which against the kind of magic they're up against, it's not going to be easy, or it's not going to be fun for them. So
interesting.
I like having non-magical ways, because magic's as Aaron was saying about having to keep the system. You need to have a system, and you need to obey your own rules. It's so easy with magic just to create a get out free card for anything. So you have to make sure not to make it too overpowered. Otherwise, there's no conflict at all in your story.
That's true, sort of following Brandon Sanderson's 3 laws of magic, one of which is the more you understand it, the more you can use it. The less you understand it, the less you can use it. Which I guess in a way should apply to tech as well, no?
Yeah, I'd say the exact, yeah. I don't really do much technology or sci-fi. I want to, I've been trying to, but I'm not very good at it. Hopefully I'll get better at it. But I think it should have the same rules as magic.
That's cool. Now, Agnes, you said yours was a portal fantasy?
Yes, that's right. And there are elements of science fiction in it, especially the tech. It's a bunch of kids, they go down into a base under the Atlantic Ocean. So it's got to be tech automatically. And a lot of what I came up with was kind of looking at what technology we have available today. So there was a video I watched, I think it was called Glass World. Don't quote me for it because I don't remember the name of it. But what it was the entire house was just touch screens.
Wow.
Which is something that, we have available already to us. We've got touchscreen phones. We've got, 3DSs with touchscreens, all sorts of stuff like that. And to see that applied in that aspect kind of put into perspective for me, okay, well, I can use this and I can turn this into technology that's futuristic and inside of a novel with that. So I always kind of, whenever I look at any sort of tech, I make sure to think, okay, is this feasible? Would this actually work? And that's kind of how I approach it.
Interesting. Now, this portal into the fantasy world, is it tech or magic, or is it both?
It's science.
Science.
So I kind of, actually what I did is I looked at sort of different, wait, never mind. That's spoilers. That's spoilers for the next book.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. We won't spoil your book.
Have to be careful.
But I do ground it in science and in string theory. So sort of that whole multiple dimensions existing at the same time. Interesting.
Aaron, what about you? Yours is urban fantasy, right?
Correct. So it's set in the present day. I kind of like to think of it as an NYPD Blue meets Buffy, because it's a cop who knows that magic exists, but one of the big rules of Magic Club is you don't talk about Magic Club. And his job, it's frustrating to him as a police officer. It's less to solve the crimes and protect the citizens, is to be kind of a local level man in black to explain the locker room slaughter mystery of how something to satisfy the citizenry that there really isn't magic out there. But the problem is they're living in a world with cell phones where everybody is now a digital reporter. And so it's becoming harder and harder to keep that center holding, and he's having to deal with that. And at the same time, on the vein of the Clark sufficiently advanced tech becomes magic, there's a large conglomerate that it is packaging magic as technology, because as long as they can come up with a suitably jargonistic way of describing things that intimidate the normals, they're fine. And so they've been waiting, and they're capitalizing on it because their competitors have no clue how they're really working, but they're able to get things out there. And because they can point to things like quantum theory, where two objects can exist in the same
space, not the same time.
Yeah, they can point at that and say, well, that's science. Why are you trying? You just don't understand our stuff because you're too stupid. And I kind of shut people down.
I read this hilarious quote by David Weber, and he says it's Brandon Sanderson. It's basically, the smarter someone thinks he is, the more they will pretend that they understand something that they don't have any clue about, just to avoid looking stupid. And so that made me think of that. It was hilarious. But actually, one of the best examples that I found of sort of blending science fiction and fantasy is the Safehold series by David Weber. It's this world, this futuristic world, thousands of years in the future, aliens are attacking humankind, so humans colonize another world. But because these aliens sort of detect the electrical signals given off by man's technology, they send people, like they make it a completely medieval society, wipe everyone's memories, and basically establish a religion around preventing the advancement of technology and stuff. So it's very science fiction mixed with fantasy, and it's a very interesting way of showing how things that we see it, or that people saw as magic, is really just technology. Like they had angelic visitations, where really it was just like a hovercraft or like a floating plane shining a bright light and using like tractor beam technology to make the people float. And so it was like angelic visitations, and it just explains the technology for it. So in a way, it would be kind of interesting to go back throughout history and look at all of the miracles and sort of think, well, what if that was actually a technology that we don't understand or didn't understand yet? Kind of a scary thing to think about.
Sounds a little bit like ancient aliens and what they do.
Yes, exactly. Alien.
I was going to say that the Safehold series is a great series, and the conceit of him being able to be, I'm going to put the pronunciation, but the sage and kind of like the modern day mystic, that he can start hopping over the planet, and because this is part of their internal myth structure, nobody's got a problem with it, and nobody's pointing at, ooh, devil magic, and being able to use that as evidence of it.
Yeah.
And James Hogan, I think, did some of that, to Agnes's point, with the ancient aliens in his Giant series. Went back and said that some of the great religious and philosophical leaders were actually alien plants put here to sow discord, to keep a puny Terran strain of the human family on its knees while the rest of the galaxy advanced.
Interesting. So now I'm going to throw a totally weird question at you. Aliens, do they exist, yes or no?
I think so. I think just the probabilities says, I think they have to. And even if you look at it religiously, I don't think there's anything, at least from the Christian faith tradition, that specifically says no, because when we talk about creation in God's image, it's free will and the capacity to reason, not that God's walking around on two legs and two arms.
Interesting. Agnes, what do you think? Aliens, yes or no?
I think they do. And actually, to add, there was an article, I think, a few months ago saying that the Vatican basically said, yes, it's a possibility as well. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That shows quite a lot. to be fair.
What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I completely say yes. I think they have to with the universe of this size. I mean, we're likely never to see them in our lifetime, or even in the lifetime of the Earth. I mean, there was a theory that the Earth is rather it's rather new in terms of intelligible life on a planet, and since there's likely to be 100 trillion years of history to go through, I mean, we're only 15 billion years into the age of the universe. It's a tiny amount compared to what can happen. So I think there definitely is life. I mean, with the size of the scale of our universe, it has to happen, I think.
Interesting. Now, an even more controversial question: magic in any shape, form, or concept. Is it like not technology that we can't understand, but magic, legitimate magic? Do you think it exists in our world or no? Anyone?
I think so. I think if you believe in anything like an afterlife or ghosts or spirits, I think you'd have to agree then that there's something that at least our physics now can't see, and then you enter the metaphysical realm.
Interesting. Agnes?
Bit of a tough question, this one.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, still trying to figure out how the buses have an unpredictable schedule, and there might be some portals involved in that. So I'm not ruling it out, right?
That's just humans being idiots. That's got nothing. That isn't magic. That's just human error.
Well, I think. What was that, Aaron?
I said that's what they just want him to think it's human error. But my cop's doing his job.
Very good. Very good. All right. Now I think one of the biggest differences between sci-fi and fantasy is the time period. Like, you'll have urban fantasy, portal fantasy that mixes science and technology, but then I think the most classic definitions of fantasy is set in sort of a medieval setting, and the classic definition of sci-fi is set far into the future, or at least in the future. So there is sort of a 1,000-year time gap between your average fantasy and sci-fi novel. No?
I think so. I think there is. I think that being in place also allows for authors to be able to tackle different points. With stuff being set in the future, it can be seen as a commentary on where our own technology and civilization could end up. Whereas fantasy, I'd say it's more for escape purposes.
Okay. Expound on that one.
Well, a lot of times we're kind of faced with these grim sort of circumstances we're under in the present day. So for me personally, when I go and I read fantasy, high fantasy especially, it's for me to escape into and to not think about what's going on in the here and now. It's kind of like if I turned on the news and I'm constantly being drenched with the same images. Whereas when I read science fiction, it's more so because I want to think about what could happen in the future. I'm trying to think of a good example. The Road.
Okay.
The author's name escapes me unfortunately right now, but it takes place in the future. It's a post-apocalyptic future. It's what could happen if we don't, fix our ways or just learn to work together. So that for me is kind of that differentiation and what the two can represent.
I think in a way it's almost like I agree that science fiction is very much a way of looking forward of what comes next or what could come next. But in a way, fantasy could almost be like a look at our evolution both as society and as humans. Like you go to a medieval society where women are treated as belongings, or they're mistreated horribly, and then it's a little bit like, okay, so now that we've seen what it was like, this barbaric civilization that we don't want to emulate, it's up to us to be better, sort of to learn from the mistakes of this fantastical civilization. It's not as much a precautionary tale or a warning as a teaching moment. That's what I think, at least.
That's true, but I also think it's a technical necessity in some ways to set a magical world in the past, because I think it's one of the fun things that urban fantasy takes on is it's really hard to go up against the wizard when you've got swords and a crossbow or a bow and arrow, because you're having to be within a certain
Power scale
that magic can work.
Conflict.
I think that wizard might be SOL if he's got a Navy SEAL sniper 1,000 yards out with a barrel.
Yeah, wizard's not going to do much
in the back.
a nuke on him, to be fair.
Pardon?
Well, I was going to say, it's like if a wizard is in like our time, he's going to struggle a bit when someone fires an ICBM missile at him.
That was another example. It's all fun and games until nukes start popping off.
Although, that could make for one hell of a great story, is like a wizard or, a magic that allows him to control technology, not, stop the nuke in midair, like Jedi style, but, like subtly affect the technology so that the nuclear missile goes astray or something. Like to combine magic with the very, very modern or even science fiction elements to really put it, to sort of show what magic can do against technology and what technology can and can't do against magic. It could be an interesting story.
Buffy scratched that surface when they had the techno pagans.
Okay.
That mixed their magic with that, and also Charles Strauss's Laundry series, where for them magic is higher end mathematics and computational issues, and so one book is about people who become vampires because they start using the wrong predictive algorithm in their stock picking software.
Wow, that sounds pretty crazy. I like how way out there it is.
No, it's fun. It's a fun series.
Now, here's a question that's going to divide, if not us, everybody who watches this: sci-fi or fantasy, which is better? In your opinion, obviously.
I'll go first. I may as well, since the other two are quiet. I'm going to be incredibly biased. I'm going to be very biased in here, and I say fantasy, but I think they're both very, very broad terms, as in you can blend both of them so well that, sci-fi, there's some incredible sci-fi science fiction out there, and like this incredible fantasy. So personally for me, because I write fantasy so much and I've read more fantasy than sci-fi, I have to say fantasy, but it's a really 50-50 split, to be honest.
All right. Agnes.
I'm going to have to go with fantasy just because that is what I grew up with. Also, I have to ask, how are you guys switching? Like, I keep seeing different people pop up on the main screen. I have no idea.
Oh, I think it's whenever we start talking.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's how it works. Whenever the person talks, the screen goes to them.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry to interrupt. But yeah, I'm going to go with fantasy just because that is kind of what I grew up with and where my kind of love of reading started.
Interesting. Aaron, what about you?
I want to be a contrarian and say sci-fi just to break the chain, but I've got to go with the truth and say fantasy because I think it's more fun to write in it. Because tell me that can't happen in my world where a freaking dog is talking to a minotaur. So as long as I've got internal rules that I play consistently with, I can have a lot more fun. And whereas if you're writing sci-fi, there are really smart people who can say, that's
not possible, and you'll get bollocked, basically. Fantasy, you seem to have a lot more control. Unless it's so far in the future that you can't just create whatever you need to, really.
Yeah, at that point, I think it becomes fantasy. I think it becomes fantasy on a spaceship at that point, which is fun. I'm not knocking.
Well, science fiction could come from the past or the future, can't it? In the future, we could have technology which is like ancient times, because maybe a race has regressed, or maybe that race doesn't know the technology.
Interesting.
So there's so many different forms, like the Einstein's theory of I don't know what the Third World War would be fought with, but the Fourth World War would be fought with sticks and stones because technology would be put back so far by nuclear war.
Interesting.
That will be basically back the archaic times.
Yeah, I think that'll be the interesting question. For our future, will the next set of Dark Ages, will it be low tech, or will it just be a period of complete chaos, but with neon lights and germ warfare?
You know what I find interesting? There's a surprising number of books, especially fantasy books, that are set in a future where magic has returned to the world, where mankind has basically destroyed themselves. For example, the Shannara Chronicles. That's set in the future, but it's magic. Like so many people envision that future where technology has essentially destroyed itself, and it's basically gone back to the medieval ages, but then there's also that element of magic in there. So it makes you think, what if the development of technology has completely suppressed magic as it was in the world,
Well, Jordan's books touch on that too, though. The Wheel of Time series, with the cycle they're in, when they talk to some of the entities that lived through the first cataclysm, it sounds an awful lot like high-tech testing laboratories that they were working their magic in. So
interesting. I did not remember that part from among those 6 million words.
Yeah, I really struggled to get into Wheel of Time.
Yeah, that is a conversation that everyone has had at some point. Oh, I couldn't enjoy it. I could. Anyway.
I really couldn't enjoy it. I'm sorry. Like, especially when I think one of the last books is basically the same event told through 25 different point of views. And by the third one, it's like, I get it. I get the point. This is not interesting.
Yeah. All right. Now for the final topic of conversation, genre mixing. We've got urban fantasy, which is sort of modern day mystery thriller, I assume, mixed with fantasy. Aaron?
Yes.
Agnes, yours is portal fantasy, which is a modern person going to a fantasy world, correct?
Yes.
And Michael, your high fantasy, completely different world. Love that. Now, let's talk about other great ways to blend the genres of both sci-fi and fantasy with others. One thing that I haven't read a lot of, but I've really enjoyed, is like mysteries, mystery thrillers set in a fantasy world, like high fantasy, but with that element of mystery and thriller. I've only read maybe 2 or 3 series, but what there were so much more interesting for me than the mysteries and thrillers set in modern world, just because it was in a fantasy world. What other genre mixes would you guys say you've enjoyed?
I would love horror, sci-fi, and fantasy blended. Well, horror, sci-fi, and urban fantasy.
Horror, sci-fi, and urban fantasy. Although
I think that combined would be really cool.
I think horror and fantasy is just dark fantasy in essence, no?
In a way, yeah. But I think blended with the present day, because I've been working on something for a while. It's probably going to be 20 years before it's finished. But I'm blending with the idea of sci-fi with people getting supernatural powers and some people using it for evil and doing really messed up things, which is going to cover the horror and sci-fi part. I have no idea what's going to happen with it. It's one of the side projects which I'm going to say is going to take me a long time to write.
That's awesome. Agnes, what about you? Sci-fi, fantasy mixed with, what would you love to see or write?
Steampunk, for sure.
Okay.
There's something that I'll be working on, which will be steampunk and sci-fi in the future. It was actually originally a short film idea, and I just decided to abandon it due to other projects. For fantasy, I would actually be interested to see some thriller and mystery, now that you mention it, because that's something I haven't encountered yet. And that sounds really intriguing. It could actually have a lot of possibilities with what could be done with it.
Yeah, like a serial killer, like a classic serial killer novel that you would get from a modern crime writer, but set entirely in a fantasy world. Instead of having the police go through the NYPD procedures, you basically have to create a whole set of procedures for the fantasy world that he lives in, and he has to go through the different things. It could actually be a pretty interesting story.
Yeah.
That would be very cool, I think.
I agree. I'm currently working on it. Would be probably sci-fi and fantasy, where it's set in the future in a world with technology and magic working side by side, and kind of where you've got shortages in the mundane provided things like food and medicine, that's where the magickers come up and start selling and becoming kind of a black market for people who can't afford to go get the high-end medicine. You go down to the shaman.
Interesting. That's a pretty interesting concept. All right, well, that's our time. Thank you so much for joining in. Aaron, Agnes, Michael, it was awesome to have you.
Thanks, it was great to participate.
Sorry I came in so late.
No worries, no worries. That's the way these things are. If you want to check out more about Aaron, Agnes, and Michael, click down below in the comments and you can check out their website, social media, all of that. Have a great day.